morning, everyone, and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Joanne Duklas here for the GDN Conversation Series. I want to thank all of you for joining us today as we deep dive into the land of Credential Engine even further, lifting the hood, if you will, to understand the potentials and possibilities for how one would go about considering implementation or thinking through all the needs and approaches for implementing open standards to help move all that ancillary information, data, if you will, linked data around. We're going to be talking with our wonderful colleagues, Jeanne and Phil. Thank you, Jeanne and Phil, for joining me today. And Jeanne, I'd love it if you could say hello to our audience and introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Jeanne Kitchens, the Chief Technology Services Officer at Credential Engine, and I am more than happy to be here today to talk about the Credential Transparency Description Language and Credential Registry.
Thank you, Jeanne. We had such a great conversation with your DCC colleague at the second part of our series. That particular video is published on the landing page, and we'll be posting that link in the chat to help all of you. Phil, please say hello to our audience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Phil Barker. I'm a consultant in Metadata. I've also worked in things like open education in the past, but at the moment I'm here as metadata consultant to the Credential Engine, helping them to build out CTDL, which you'll hear a lot more about soon.
Phil, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. In fact, I saw you present at our GDN convening in San Diego in October, and it was quite helpful to help understand some of the good work that's going on. I think I want to sort of start at a really, really high level. And Jeanne, we've heard from you in terms of what drew your passion to this good work. I don't know if you want to add any color to that, because I do think it's important that our audience understand the backgrounds we bring to the table and why we're doing this.
Yeah, well, I have been working in education and workforce development for longer than I like to admit. It's been a while, and been working specifically on the Credential Transparency Description Language since about 2015. And, it really has been, I know this has been, said before, a labor of love, I guess, because it is just, it is very important that information that is helpful to students and helpful to employers and helpful to schools, be far more transparent and in a global way. So we really, at Credential Engine, our mission is credential transparency. And we like to say for illuminating pathways for everyone. And that is why we do this work every day.
One of the things that you've said to me before is the importance of these kinds of standards to advance interoperability. I'd be interested in having your thoughts on how these this work you're doing at Credential Engine is contributing to that.
And once we really start getting under the hood, Phil will, deeper dive into the CTDL and how it works. But we're all familiar with the word interoperability, and that word can, mean different things. It could mean, interoperability in terms of people and in terms of systems and in terms of data. And, there's a lot of standards out there that are very important, and they're focused on interoperability, going from one database to another database. But with a CTDL, we do care about that, but we also care about just data in the wild, transparency for search and discovery. And, we're all on the web, we're all looking for information. Of course, now there's AI to help us even more, but we need to make sure that we're not only focused on moving data from one database to another, but having solutions that can be used out in the world outside of those databases that make information transparent, discoverable, in the case of CTDL, linkable.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Phil, I have to ask you the same question, what brought you to this universe?
I came to this work through things like sharing and disseminating online learning resources. Yeah, like Jeannie, I've been working in that area for longer than I care to admit. And it led to work on things like open educational resources and open education in general. And I realized that, first of all, so much of what's created to support education and training is really difficult to do well. And that makes it expensive. And it's too expensive to be used just once. So sharing is essential. Uh, and also, when you share something openly, you can build a community around it. You can share the effort in creating it, and you get better resources as a result. And also, you have discussions about the practice of how those resources are used and what you're trying to achieve, and so you get better practice. So I came to this through I a belief that sharing things and sharing things as openly as is possible or as appropriate leads to better resources, better data, better practice, better education.
Yeah, it's a very quite the ecosystem. And I've been quite impressed with Credential Engine and other communities' willingness, the educators themselves, willingness to share, and that thread of community of practice, I think is very powerful, and it's one I personally believe in. So this session is about getting under the hood. So I'm going to ask Jeannie, can you maybe you have a slide deck to share with us, and we're going to make sure it's published as well on the website, and my colleague Amalia will share a link to that again to help people in the chat. And I want to also, just before you share it, I want to remind our audience, our practice is to encourage you through the Q&A to share some questions that you may have, or if something isn't making sense, if there's an acronym that somebody uses, whatever it is. And I will commit to keeping my eye on that Q&A, and I'll try my best to weave it into the conversation to help Jeannie and Phil help you understand what is under that hood. So over to you, Jeannie. I'd love to see your slide and have you walk us through it.
Let me go ahead and share.
And I should mention, we are using technology, people. So should it fail us, there's the website. We will put that link out there. Over to you, Jeannie.
Sounds great. So this is, I promise, just a very small deck. It really is just meant as an opener, to get into what is under the hood. But just as a primer, we are talking about Credential Engine's open technologies. And there's really two major pieces of that. The Credential Transparency Description Language, or CTDL. We do love our acronyms. And it is a language for a description language. And it is for describing things in the realm of credentials. And the name is a little deceptive because people think, oh, they're only going to talk about credentials, but that is not true. In a couple of slides, you're going to see the depth and the breadth of the CTDL. But the important thing here is to know that it is an open family of schemas, and that the other technologies we have are the credential registry and tools for getting data into the credential registry, all as the CTDL. So these are the two things that Phil and I are concentrating on today.
And when you talk about samples of data and so on, I know you touch on that a little bit on your slides later, Jeannie, but could you give me, and I'm looking at our audience now, we have colleagues on the line, for example, around the world who are involved in transfer mobility. You're going from one school to another school, or from a prior learning reality to another reality. What might be an example, one example before you dive into the details here of, say, you could use competency frameworks or learning outcomes. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit and tell me if that would be the type of data that would be captured in the registry?
Oh, definitely both of those. So when I said CTDL, the word credential becomes, people, we don't want people to think it's only about credentials, because credentials, as you just, alluded to, Joanne, have to be transportable. They have to go even as simply as from your learning to your work. A potential employer, your employer has to understand them so they can understand your qualifications, for a position or to move up. So the idea of the CTDL is not only to describe the credentials for those kinds of reasons, the mobility of students, but the things adjacent to it that you need to know about it, the outcomes, what are the metrics for those credentials, transfer value. We have in CTDL, we can describe the credit, for example, credit values that can be transferred. You can get down to a granularity of competencies, and there's many communities of practice out there. And when Phil and I talk about competencies, we're really talking about it as sort of an umbrella term, because you may call them learning objectives or performance objectives. Some people refer to soft skills or essential skills or 21st century skills. The way the CTDL is modeled and developed is to be able, no matter what the domain, no matter what the community of practice, to be able to make data transparent and portable and meaningful to people for reasons like, student mobility. And Phil, I think, can talk a little bit more about that, beginning here.
Yeah, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what CTDL is in technical terms. And the first thing that's important is that it's based on an international standard for data on the web that comes from the World Wide Web Consortium, which is called the Resource Description Framework, or RDF. And there are two important technical features of RDF, which are that it allows definitions of the meaning of the terms that are being used in the descriptions that are being shared. So it allows the semantics of a property like accredited by to be defined in such a way that is accessible to the people who receive the data, on a technical level, the computer systems that receive the data. And it also allows links to further descriptions to be provided. And for these reasons, RDF has been called, or has been used for what's been called the semantic web, for knowledge graphs, and for linked data. And those are really just three different views on the same sort of world of what we generally call nowadays linked data. But each of those terms represents a slightly different view of the type of data that we're looking at and how it's used. Typically with RDF, you can describe one thing, and looking at the diagram that's showing on Jeanne's screen at the moment, you can describe a certificate, and you can say that that is a certificate in dental assisting. That's the funny rosette shaped thing in the middle of the diagram. But you can also link to data about other things that are related to it. What skills are required to earn it? And as Jeanne said, we call these competencies. What opportunities exist to learn these skills? And you can also describe other things like organizations, the organization that offers this credential, the organization that accredits the one that offers the credential, and so on. And it does all this that's built in a way that's built on the fundamental standards that are used on documents on the World Wide Web. The descriptions of the different things linked together, just like the pages on the World Wide Web do.
And Phil, some of our audience are more from the academic side. They don't live in the land of data exchange standards necessarily. So just to be clear, and in my mind, I feel I am, but I'm going to ask the question just in case. We use a lot of the terms like standards, etc. In none of this are you suggesting that you would standardize their content. Rather, you're creating a world where whatever their customized outcomes are, or whatever way they label their accrediting bodies or competency, that wonderful creativity can continue. You're creating a universe where it can move across in a clear way.
Absolutely. It's the descriptions that are standardized. It's not the things that are being described. We try to describe the world as it is, but in such a way that those descriptions can be used as widely as possible.
And Jeanne, did you want to add some color there?
Yeah, that was a really important point to make, because we don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking, oh, I have to express something in a very certain way or redo everything that I have done. That is definitely not the case at all. And the great thing about using the CTDL is that, you know, just as you said, and as Phil described, it's not about changing the content of what you're doing. It's more about that content now dropping into a framework that then makes it transparent, transportable, linkable, and all those sorts of things.
May I add a follow-up? Because these are questions I get asked all the time, or comments that people make. And I'd like to sort of continue to break down the myths, if you will, and clarify. I've seen examples where designers of systems, local designers, need to, for a variety of reasons, to create their own unique ecosystem. Maybe it's because it's the client they're working with or the community they're working with, et cetera. In looking at all of this, are there some high examples or ways where maybe you don't use all of the CTDL, but you pick certain key things to enable at least some layer of broader interoperability beyond your local context? Can we explore that space a little bit?
So trust me, no one would ever use all of the CTDL. It's
Except for
huge.
us.
Except maybe Credential
It's
Engine,
all
but
it.
I think there's still there's one or two bits of it that we don't use. And yes, RDF is itself, you know, this resource description framework, it is designed in RDF. It's really difficult to explain. The only way to sort of fully understand it is to work with it. But because RDF itself is written as RDF, that means that the vocabularies that are used to describe things can themselves be shared. And so if you and they can be linked to other vocabularies, so you end up with this really powerful way of being able to accommodate the specific requirements of communities, while at the same time linking to broader, more generalized terms that perhaps provide a way of describing something that's understandable outside of that specific community.
So you want to add something there, Jeanne, before I ask my next question?
Yeah, the CTDL is a very large language. It currently has over 1,200 terms. And as this slide notes, every term in the CTDL is defined for semantic meaning. That's one of the critical aspects of this language. So you're not changing your content, like you're dropping it into the framework. So now you can describe these things in a common language and have all the, you know, interoperability and mobility stuff that we worked at. But the nice thing about it is we don't have, for example, conformance requirements that maybe some data standards organizations might have, where you have to like prove conformance. If there's only, you know, one aspect of the CTDL that you need to use, then that's all that you need to use. There's no requirements to use all of it. You use what is applicable to support your use cases, you know, your application and so forth.
And would
And
you say, oh, go ahead, Phil.
I was going to say there's no requirement to use all of it, and there's also no
Mhm.
requirement to use just CTDL.
Right.
If you've got another standard built on the same sort of framework that describes things that aren't covered in CTDL, then you can use that standard alongside alongside CTDL, and the two will work together very nicely.
So one of our colleagues in the audience have asked a baseline question. And sometimes I often think that, well, I have a follow-up to that, but I'll recite their question. And it's, how do I author my unique creative content so that it gets placed in the proper CTDL term and related to the right information, which kind of relates to a question I was going to ask you, which is, what would be that top 5 that of the CTDL linked data components you'd recommend people consider adding to their systems so that at least some level of interop is there? And I think that might be the underpinning of Wayne's question around authoring. And I can reread that question if it's helpful. How do I
That's a
author my unique creative content so it gets placed in the proper CTDL term and related to the right information? So I think my question is about priorities. Where do you start? His question is about how to actually do it. Who would like to take that one?
I'm thinking
I can
about your
take.
question of the top 5 things in CTDL. It's not something I've ever considered before. I think I would probably start with the core of CTDL that's kind of in the name, credentials.
I was gonna
You know,
assume
that
that,
that
Yeah.
but
that's where we started. So I guess it's closest to us. I'd then be thinking about, okay, what are the skills that this credential asserts a person has acquired? Probably organization, describing organizations. And then for me, I think it would be learning opportunities. But I'm terrible at
that's
this
you.
because
Yeah.
every time I add one, I think, oh, if you're describing a learning opportunity, then you want to describe the assessment, or the if you're
And the
describing
course.
it just moves out and out and
Mhm.
out and out until eventually you
It
encompass
does.
all of education.
But may I ask Jeannie
Yeah.
that question? What would you start
Mhm.
with? And I could give you mine,
Um,
but
Sure. Well, for the core of the CTDL, I mean, we work with a lot of different like software companies that are creating, their own content. So this kind of will also get to the question in the Q&A. And so each product has their own unique use cases, for their audience to do something very specific. So the CTDL application for them is going to be based on their use cases, based on their product. But one common thread is always the CTID, a lovely acronym that is just what it sounds like. It's an identifier. And in the CTDL, it is defined, it is literally a term in the CTDL. It's defined as a globally unique identifier. And that's like a first step in a system, is to just start minting CTIDs for what we would call like a top level entity, an object. And to begin managing that data so it is associated with this globally unique identifier. Because with this linked data structure here that you see and this picture on the bottom that Phil was going over, those circles are like the top level things that have CTIDs. And what's really important, and what this picture is communicating here, is the value of linking information together. If you just have a certificate sitting there all by its lonesome, but you don't know who offers it, you don't know what the competencies are, you don't know what programs it's in, well, then you're kind of only have a very small piece of the picture. So the CTID would be the one thing, like the lowest hanging fruit sort of thing. And then for authoring creative content, first, it's really important to know There's a different standard out there that is also based on RDF, right? Phil called the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative. And that focused on educational resources like curriculum, like what I actually teach, you know. The CTDL is not like describing the book, you know, it's not describing like the actual learning resource used in the classroom. LRMI is used for that. So for creative content, I just wanted to point that out. But if you're creating a system that the CTDL covers, and maybe I'll just jump here, Bill, because this slide shows all of those kind of top level entities, the depth and breadth of the CTDL. So if you're creating, you know, content, describing something, like describing a job, you'll see the CTDL even covers jobs, or you're discovering a transfer value, then what you can do is utilize the many tools that are available on our technical site that are openly available. No login required, no membership required. We have things like mapping guides. You can download part of the CTDL, all of the CTDL. And I really think of it as a mapping exercise. You know, if you don't have to completely change your system. If you are designing a new system, of course, we would recommend use the CTDL in your system. If you have an existing system, it's not as though you have to completely change it, but you do need to map to the CTDL. So what you would do if you have, you know, content or descriptions that are within these domains in the CTDL, then I would say that that step is doing the mapping.
So I'm gonna get a little bit basic with this question, but I want to make sure we're speaking to the broad range in our audience. And I think that authoring question is a key one. When you talk about the CTID, to me, ID is we have this type of credential, we're identifying it with this value. How in your world, what credentials are we talking about here?
Any
Well,
type of credential, really.
Well, what does that
Everything
mean? Because I've heard it used for ID, for a person, I've heard it used for
right.
an
Logging
organization.
in.
a CTID can identify anything that's relevant to credentials. So you know, the CTID won't be used for an organization, for the learning outcomes, for the course. Everything that you want to be able to refer to, everything that you'd want to link to in the link data needs a CTID, because it quite literally is the link in its form. It's a, to use the technical term, an HTTP URI. So it's, you know, the same as the thing that you type at the top of your browser bar when you want to go to a web page. As I said before, you know, we're using the fundamental standards that are used for the World Wide Web here. And if you were, when you're asking about, you know, what types of credential can we cover, I'm based in Scotland. So, you know, one of the things that I always say is that when my colleagues in Credential Engine talk about credentials, they mean what I would call a qualification, and what, you know, a lot of other people call a qualification as well. And it can be anything from a badge, school diploma, certificate, degree, the whole range of qualifications or credentials.
I dropped a link in the chat to our current list of credential types. And you'll see they're the credentials that are offered and intended to be issued to people. So we're describing what you can get or what a person has. I think it is important to note that what we are not doing is describing the individuals that earn those credentials, and we don't issue credentials. So for those of you who are in the verifiable credential or LER or badge world, that's about issuing the credential to the person. But the CTDL describes that credential that gets issued. So it is also directly compatible with those other kinds of standards that are for that specific purpose. So when Phil said you don't just use only the CTDL, that's just also another example of the CTDL kind of integrating directly with other data standards that are really important.
And thank you, that's what I was trying to get to, that it covers that whole raft of learning experiences, those artifacts of learning from badging all the way through in terms of even things we haven't thought of that might emerge as like a skill stamp or something like that. I kind of want to make some analogies here for some of our audience. And you've shared with me previously how it might be similar to course catalogs and so on. So let's imagine we're an institution where we've digitized our course catalog and we're part of a state or province or national transfer ecosystem. What might be an example of how I would take that course catalog, not learner data, but it could be affiliated with a learner at some point because they want to move from school A to school B, or we want to make sure that course and its equivalency at another school are represented. How might, and this is a big question, but how might that school sort of think, how do I get part of this process? Because it's not, you say you're from Scotland, Phil. I'm from Canada. I'm representing a European organization. Jeannie's from the US. This is not an American only type of offering here. This is an offering that has legs beyond borders. How would a school in another jurisdiction outside the US or a province or state or whatever start to play with some of this CTDL? Any thoughts around that? And we could use the course catalog as an example.
I think, and I'd like to link it to some of the things that Jeannie was talking about as well, about issuing credentials as verifiable credentials, which are one of the technologies that's based on a similar approach to CTDL. And one of the key things about this approach, this sort of RDF or knowledge graph approach, is that a description of something can be used in different contexts. So if you have descriptions of courses in a course catalog, when you can reuse those descriptions when you issue whatever it is that you issue at the end of the course, whether it's a certificate, a badge, a transcript, or whatever. And that thing that you issue can contain links to the descriptions of the courses that were taken in the course catalog. And if the course descriptions link to things like the learning outcomes that the course addressed, description of the institution that offered the courses or who accredited those courses, then the data from all of those links becomes available from the link that's in the badge or the transcript that was issued. So, it becomes like browsing the web, but on a more technical, automated, machine agent level rather than clicking through links on a web browser. And that brings a huge depth of data into view for anybody who's presented with this badge or this transcript that's been issued. It brings all this data into view, which is why we talk about transparency. You can see through all of these links a huge amount of data that offers depth and context to the very bare information that's issued in a badge.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our audiences asked, does this therefore mean it's like being able to present a course catalog alongside of levels? I think it's more than that, based on what you've described. And in my brain, if I was to use some perhaps bad metaphors, but it's taking something that's on a flat piece of paper and doing more with it, that you can actually work with the data and other entities can actually work with all that linked data in a way to do something extraordinary. And some of the examples of extraordinary that I've seen is creating intentional pathways for learners so that they can link it to job data, their coursework that they've done. They can cherry pick and link the relevant pieces so that they can curate some kind of employment record that has specialized meaning for a specialized job opportunity. This may be future, but I have seen some wonderful early stages examples of this kind of portability. Any comments of maybe some exemplars out there that don't have to name names if you're not comfortable, but some exemplar usages that you've seen where they've used some of these standards, this linked data to achieve that kind of dream, or perhaps another one that I haven't described?
Well, and going, just backtracking a little bit, Joanne, to where you started, kind of getting to what are the exemplars and working with partners at Credential Engine, we have, and actually probably everybody's seen this slide long enough. I'm just going to go ahead and click here because it'll also kind of get to your question. We have numerous resources and that, anyone can utilize and publish to the registry, but we also work directly with partners. And we have many examples of partners who have really, taken the CTDL and use it in ways, that are incredibly helpful. And one of them is definitely Western Governors University. I dropped a link in the chat to the Credential Finder. It's a tool for seeing the CTDL, for seeing like CTDL data in action, because we know that if we didn't have that, it would be, harder for people to grasp what we're talking about. And literally what you're seeing there is the CTDL. And for Western Governors University, WGU, it's not just the act of publishing that data, they literally use it. It's critical to them. So they're putting this data in the registry for all of their current, what they call their current curriculum. So all the courses they offer, the credentials they offer, those are linked together. The learning objectives or competencies that are taught, and those competencies or learning objectives are also linked to what are considered to be RSDs, rich skill descriptors, that are aimed toward employers. So all that data is linked together, and then they use it. So they use it in systems for issuing verifiable credentials in a wallet that they are developing to help their students make sure that their students are successful in their career pathways that they have chosen, and also making sure that this data is relevant to employers. So that is a really good example of really putting this all into action. And it took a little while to get there. So it's not as though it magically happened overnight. So you don't have to bite off more than you can chew, right? You can you can take those bits and pieces of it. And what this slide is talking about is that not only is the CTDL available for anyone to use. So like if you're designing a database, you're designing, a new application, and so forth, you can use the CTDL in your data design, okay? And you can also use our publishing system to output data that maybe you have behind the scenes, stored as structured data as CTDL linked open data structure. And that's why we have the credential registry, and we have an entire suite of tools here. So we have ways that you can consume the data from the registry, because the purpose of the credential registry is to store data in a way that if you are consuming it, it's always CTDL. It's literally the credential transparency description language. It's that linked data structure that Phil went over in the earlier slide. And we have a range of publishing options. So to meet people where they are, we have many, for example, states in the United States that have structured data about programs, credentials, and they use our API. And once they do that mapping exercise, they can just, you know, programmatically keep that information current. It's hands off. It's all automatically done through the API. But for other organizations that may not yet have that capability, they can use many of our other tools. And, you know, as we said earlier, it's, you know, and it's not an all or none. You know, you start with where you are, you know, some part of it to understand the value of it, and then you can expand from there. So, I want to also point out that, you know, we are Credential Engine. Yes, we are based in the US, and thereby, you know, we have focused on states because all states have authority and they have data that they can express as CTTL, and we're a small nonprofit, so we have to, you know, put our programs where they're most effective. But we also we're a signatory of GDN, right? And we want to work with other countries. There's global applicability here. One of the countries that we're proud to be working with right now is South Africa, SAQA, the Qualifications Authority. We are going to be, you know, working with them on a multi-day workshop in March to look at that Qualifications Authority's data and the CTDL and how they complement each other and how the CTDL can be utilized. And this comes off the heels of last year and all the way to the end of 2024. For a few months, we worked on adding qualifications frameworks to the CTDL. And there's, you know, like well over 200 countries and regions that use qualifications frameworks to align credentials to to progression. You know, that's really important, a progression of, you know, education pathways, you know, to employment. So here, the main thing I want to say here is that we have a lot of tools. You know, some are more geared toward like a content person, somebody who knows the content, and some require technical, right, developers, engineers to like utilize APIs to do integration. So we have the best of both worlds here. And regardless of which way you go, we have open guidance available. And we could also provide some complementary technical assistance. And then we also are experts in this area. So we can also, you know, provide for, you know, for some fees, you know, for recouping our costs, you know, to go even deeper into things and provide, you know, professional services.
So, Jeannie, I do have a question
Yeah.
from the audience, and I
Okay.
want to make sure we clarify some of what they're taking from this, and I'll reframe the question in layperson terms. But one of my government colleagues asked, we're not talking about storing everything in one big Uber database anywhere, correct?
Right. I mean, we do maintain the credential registry and but there can be many credential registries. Even the credential registry is open source code. But for you know, there's a lot of different software and different databases out there for like different purposes and different systems and, you know, for different reasons. So it's not as though we're saying you don't have those, so you always will have those. What we're saying is that if you have a database and, you know, you want to have your data that is in the realm of CTDL, you know, based on all those areas that we showed you in the slide deck, you can map to the CTDL to output it as CTDL linked data structure. You can, you know, make some updates to your database without having to like completely restructure it. like including the CTID. And then this question gets into the RDF world, so I'll ask Phil to also comment.
RDF is absolutely based on the idea that information is stored in many places and that you can link from one place to another. There are technical considerations that you need to consider when you're doing that, because if one of the things that you want to be able to do is to search, then as we've found just with the sort of the web of human information, the regular World Wide Web, it can be useful to build centralized indexes that hold that data, so you only have one place to search. But generally speaking, CTDL doesn't all have to live in the Credential engine's credential registry. That is just one registry. There certainly could be others. And it doesn't have to live just in registries. We've mentioned before the idea of verifiable credentials, which could have some CTDL in them, just enough to link to data that's held elsewhere. So I think one of the things that I would like to see in the future personally is what's called sort of personal graphs, personal knowledge graphs, where with the help of suitable tools, individuals are able to maintain data about themselves in such a way that it is also exposed as linked data, and so that they can take advantage where appropriate, not publishing anything without anybody's permission, take advantage of data that's available as RDF elsewhere on the world. And there's
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Phil. Please finish.
I was just going to say that there's a link here between the idea of wallets, for example, where an individual can have data about the credentials that they own in a wallet, and that can then link to the public information outside of the wallet.
So a government, for example, or a quality assurance agency, for example, or even a school that has a lot of inbound transfer students, they could essentially, or outbound transfer students, they could essentially add special metadata to their data sets, or, CTDL identifiers, et cetera, that aligns with the CTDL link standards, so that, and perhaps even publish that information so that others, if they wanted to then set up a connection to that province, be it others being a school, another government, another jurisdiction, another transfer body, et cetera, they could see that that jurisdiction is using that universal CTDL language. They could connect to it and therefore use whatever information comes through for their purposes. Everybody keeps their own data themselves, but they're transparent about how to allow access to others when it's possible to do so and appropriate to do so. Is that a layperson way to describe some of this? And please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Jeannie.
Yeah, no, you did a great job. And I just want to make sure to the end of this question where it says, it is this common link metadata standard that makes data transferable, interoperable, readable. That answer is yes. Because it is that output, and we do call it metadata. It is the structured data, linked data structure about that thing, that resource that you are describing. That can be interoperable, and as Joanne, as you were describing, it could be that your school is outputting data as CTDL, and another school is doing it, and another school is doing it, a state is doing it. And if they're following the language, if they're using the CTDL language, then it's going to be interoperable and linkable. And it's that linkable part that's really important too.
And for some of the really important information, it's not even necessary that they use CTDL. CTDL works well with other standard languages from RDF. So there's a lot of key schemes, classification schemes that are hosted by governments. And if they were published as RDF, that would be a huge step forwards in the world of linked data.
And I'm just going to ask you, Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind taking down the slides so that I can we can
Sure.
see each other. And I invite my audience, if there's a particular slide that they want to pull back up, we can happily do that. And I believe by now it is published on the website for your viewing pleasure. But let me ask you something. And I kind of want to also always bring it back to, how does one onboard to this? And I want to do it by type of stakeholder. Just, you gave some illustrative examples and so on. But if we're looking to get under the hood, and you use the example of an interclassroom colleague where you're doing a 3-day workshop to sort of unpack things and clarify things and so on. If one was navigating this space, let's imagine that they are a school. We'll start with a school. What would be the incentive? Usually they're very focused on bringing learners in and, of course, contributing to student success. What would be the incentive for starting with a school to consider putting into their student information system something related or something about the CTDL?
Working directly with a number of schools, in particular community colleges, where, you know, even schools have many systems, and data is, you know, in many systems for different purposes. Sometimes it's really geared maybe only to specific staff, or, you know, specific reasons for use internally. And of course, you know, schools are going to have websites that, you know, for the content to describe the programs and so forth. But even schools find that there are use cases, there are important things that they need to provide their students that they have trouble doing because of siloed systems that have different purposes. And so we are working with schools to output data as CTDL. And another big area is, you know, credit for prior learning. You know, there used to kind of be an attitude of, well, you know, we don't, you know, it's, you know, case by case, person by person, and there was really no clarity. And now we're really seeing, you know, schools seeing it is important for students to be able to continue their education and get back in without having to repeat things. And it's valuable to everyone. It's valuable to the school, it's valuable to the students. So that's another big area that we're very specifically working with schools on, and organizations that are can take advantage of having courses which are commonly, you know, like a starting point for credit for prior learning or prior learning assessments and those kinds of things. And, you know, making it more transparent what kind of credit can be earned, can be, you know, made available to a student if they were to transfer into a program, for example. So we're definitely working with schools and organizations in those kinds of realms.
And you know, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Phil, before I go to my next example. No?
No.
Yeah. What about, let's say, a state, a provincial, or national agency of some
Mhm.
kind? Why would they want to consider somehow mapping to the CTDL? What would be the benefit to them, and separately
And
to perhaps their learners or their communities?
yeah, and you know, governmental entities, you know, whether it's a US state or, you know, a province in another country, has responsibility, right, for their citizens, for their community. They have responsibility for their, you know, ensuring a strong economy. And part of a strong economy is ensuring that you have a, you know, a very strong workforce, right? So you have people who have the preparation, and it is incredibly valuable to have a clear, transparent understanding and data reusability for those governments. So that is why in the US, we have partnered with 30 plus states. I've lost track at this point. And what they all have in common is this need to have a transparent, common data structure, linked data structure to benefit their communities. And that is critically important for, skills-based economies, and it's important in other countries as well.
Yeah, I liken it metaphorically to creating the plumbing or the highways to enable
Right.
whatever you want to go wherever you want as you would need it to in order to create upskilling, cross-skilling, and advance access to education and future jobs and employment. So I think you did a wonderful job, both of you, in helping us understand a little bit more about what's under the hood to consider implementing open standards and to leverage the example or the actual information, the robust standards that are available from Credential Engine. I really want to thank you both, and thank you, Jeanne, for mentioning that the GDN. For the benefit of our audience, the Groningen Declaration Network is a European trust, and we work hard to inspire collaboration, interoperability, and digital credential exchange, which isn't always about personal learner data. There's a lot of ancillary data that we need to spend more work on. The competency frameworks, the skills, the learning outcomes, the recognition of that credential, the structure, what it is, the nature of it, what it pathways to, what opportunities it provides in terms of access to work. I was chatting with one of your colleagues just the other day, and I was giving them a connection so that they could get what we in my country call knock codes. Knock codes are how the government at the federal level define certain sectors, labor areas in the economy, labor market categories in the economy. Well, imagine if we could share that kind of information across borders, we would really help create a globalized workforce, which with all the innovations and opportunities to hold hands across borders that exist now, I think these kinds of infrastructure efforts are critical as we keep moving forward. And I can't thank you both enough. I would like to do a couple of small shout outs. We have a wonderful new memorandum of understanding with the Pan-Canadian Consortium on Admissions and Transfer, PCCAT. And in addition to webinars, we're also doing a Toronto convening May 28th to 30th, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at Centennial College in Toronto. I'd be excited for people to join us there because actually our focus is going to be on prior learning, on transfer, on creating access for learners, and figuring out ways to continue to move the envelope. We'll be having sessions from Data Standards United, sessions from faculty, policy experts, credential experts, and the like, as we work to sort of expand out the conversation around some of this space. In addition, we have the annual convening in Oslo, and that's October the 29th to the 31st. It's being done in partnership with our Norwegian government as well as CICT, which are all gurus in the space of quality assurance, recognition, learner mobility, and the systems and the scaffolding that you need to put together, both from practical purposes as well as actual standards in order to support an ecosystem where learners need to have information about themselves in their hands, but also proper connections happening so that they can be seamless in their journey through to access to work and learning. Very excited about that particular convening. And we are about to launch another webinar series with our wonderful colleagues at Velocity Network Foundation, where we're looking at the ecosystem of trust, because that is what we're all trying to do as we create a network of networks. These are about people. It's about systems and standards, yes, but ultimately it's about change, transformative change, which is driven by people. And it really is important to build those handshakes across borders, across thinking, across semantic nomenclature, whatever it might be, So we're excited to launch that next 5-part series. I want to thank Jeanne and Phil for their time today. I can't thank you enough to our Credential Engine colleagues for this 3-part series. We will have the landing page available with access to videos, with resources and the like for all of you. I believe my colleague Amalia has shared it in the chat already. We'll also share this out to our community network around the world to share further about the good work that's going on. Keep up this wonderful effort. We're grateful to all of you. And we think that it has the secret to the sauce for change, more change into the future.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everyone. It's been a
Thank you all.
pleasure.
Yes. Have a wonderful day, everyone.